President Volodymyr Zelensky was meeting the French, German, and British leaders in London on Monday as Kiev's European allies try to strengthen Ukraine's hand in thorny talks on a US-backed plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war. According to Associated Press, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was due to gather with Zelensky, President Emmanuel Macron and Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the British leader's 10 Downing Street residence. Zelensky said late Sunday that his talks with European leaders this week in London and Brussels will focus on security, air defense, and long-term funding for Ukraine's war effort. The leaders are working to ensure that any ceasefire is backed by solid security guarantees both from Europe and the US to deter Russia from attacking again. US and Ukrainian negotiators completed 3 days of talks on Saturday aimed at trying to narrow differences on the US administration's peace proposal. Zelensky said in a post on Telegram that talks had been substantive, and that National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov and Chief of the General Staff Andriy Natov were traveling back to Europe to brief him. A major sticking point in the proposal is the suggestion that Ukraine must cede control of its eastern Donbass region to Russia, which illegally occupies most but not all of the territory. Ukraine and its European allies have balked at the idea of handing over land.
Can this plan work for Ukraine, Mr. Zelenskiy? Will you give any territory to Russia? Do you trust President Trump's team in these talks? Are you being pushed into a fast-paced deal by the Americans? What's your message to President Putin? Can this plan work, Mr. Starmer? Mr. Starmer, will you promise Ukraine won't get a bad deal? Work, Chancellor. Is the US plan too soft on Russia? Is President Trump sidelining Europe again? Prime Minister, will British troops be sent to Ukraine? Will you back a deal that gives Ukrainian land to Russia, Prime Minister? President, can you promise Ukraine will be pressured into a bad deal? Is the US plan too soft on Russia, Mr. President? Will Britain send troops to Ukraine, Prime Minister? Is President Trump sidelining Europe again? Are you standing up to Washington or following their lead?
One more, sir.
Let me begin by welcoming you all to Downing Street. Thank you very much. Volodymyr, very good to see you here on nearly the 4th anniversary of this awful conflict. That we stand with Ukraine, and if there's to be a ceasefire, it needs to be a just and lasting ceasefire. And that's why it's so important that we repeatedly set out the principle that matters about Ukraine for Ukraine. And we stand here to support you in the conflict and support you in the negotiations and make sure that this is just and lasting settlement if we can get that far. But you're very welcome. I look forward to our discussions. Thank you very much to you.
A Kremlin propagandist compared the war against Ukraine to the Great Patriotic War and concluded that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin inherited a bad nation. The propagandist reminded that the aggression against Ukraine will, in the coming weeks, outlast the Great Patriotic War. The Red Army of that time had already reached Berlin, while Putin's forces are stagnating. Solovyov blamed the failure of the so-called SVO on the Russian people, who are unwilling to die for the ruins of villages in a neighboring country. Why haven't we achieved results? Because not the whole country is fighting. The Supreme Commander is fighting. The government is fighting. The presidential administration is fighting. The governors are fighting. And then further down, what are you doing? Ruining people's spirits? It's New Year's. Our troubles aren't at the front. They're in the rear, the propagandist said. He called for the revival of the repressive group Smersh and the execution of those who do not want to fight for the Kremlin's imperial ambitions. Smersh is needed. It's not their conscience that needs appealing. Nothing convinces people more than the distinctive sound of a bolt being pulled, Solovyov stated. The Kremlin, through Solovyov, is trying to create an image of a guilty people, while the real decisions and mistakes of Putin and his vertical of power are completely ignored. Besides, an awkward moment occurred on the Russian propaganda program Evening with Volodymyr Solovyov. It unexpectedly revealed Russia's technological and economic backwardness compared to the world's leading powers. An invited expert, speaking about the situation in the Russian energy sector, reported that, according to the plans of the Russian Ministry of Energy, the country should annually increase production by 2 gigawatts of its total capacity. Solovyov inquired about the United States' performance in this area and received a rather unpleasant answer. It turns out that the Americans are expanding their energy production by 67 gigawatts annually, while the Chinese are expanding by a whopping 450. A sad Solovyov was forced to admit that, in comparison, Russia's 2 gigawatts are nothing. So Russia is 2, America is 67, China is 450. That's nothing. That's called a rejection of any growth, the Kremlin propagandist stated. Central question in Russia's war against Ukraine. Will the Russian leader be satisfied with subjugating Ukraine, or will he seek to extend Russian influence and control further into Europe, as many European leaders fear? 3 historical impulses provide insight into Putin's ultimate goals. The impulse to expand control, to enhance security, to return to the Russia state lands that were lost for various reasons, and to reunite the 3 branches of the greater Russian nation. Putin has used elements of all 3 narratives in his rhetoric since before he launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Each of those narratives have different implications for the dimensions of the threat Russia poses to Europe. Yet it is impossible to know which one prevails in Putin's strategic calculations, nor how his successors will choose among them, although the narratives will certainly influence their foreign policy thinking. Prudence dictates that Europe should prepare for the worst, while hoping to steer Russia toward a less perilous course, even to the point of reducing the salience of those 3 expansionist narratives for Russian security.